Welcome to our latest 338 Canada vote projection update for March 26, 2025. With the federal election approaching, the political landscape is constantly shifting. Today, we'll break down the latest polling numbers, explore key regional trends, and analyze what this means for each party moving forward. Who's leading, who's gaining ground, and which battlegrounds could decide the outcome. Let's dive into the numbers. National overview. At the national level, the Liberal Party, LPC, maintains a lead with 41% support. However, with a 5% margin of error, their actual support could be anywhere between 36% and 46%. The Conservative Party, CPC, is not far behind at 37% with a 4% margin, placing them in a range of 33% to 41%. The New Democratic Party, NDP, sits in third place at 10%, but with a 2% margin, their real support could be anywhere from 8% to 12%. The Bloc Québécois, BQ, which is a regional party focused on Quebec, holds 6% nationally, but with a 1% margin, this could range from 5% to 7%. Lastly, the Green Party of Canada, GPC, has 4% support, and given its 2% margin, its real strength could be 2% to 6%. While the Liberals hold a lead nationally, their advantage is concentrated in key regions such as Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario, while the Conservatives maintain strongholds in the Prairies and Alberta. Now let's examine each region to see how these numbers translate across the country. Regional breakdown, Atlantic Canada. This region remains a Liberal stronghold, with the LPC commanding 56% support. However, with a 7% margin, their actual backing could range from 49% to 63%. The CPC follows at 30%, but with a 6% margin, their real support could be between 24% and 36%. The NDP, traditionally weaker in Atlantic Canada, stands at 8%, but with a 3% margin, it could be anywhere from 5% to 11%. Meanwhile, the GPC holds 4% support with a 2% margin, placing them between 2% and 6%. Despite some conservative growth, the Liberals remain firmly in control of this region. In Quebec, the LPC leads with 39% support, but with a 6% margin, their real range is 33% to 45%. The Bloc Québécois, BQ, a major player in the province, stands at 27% with a 4% margin, meaning their actual support could be 23% to 31%. The CPC holds 22% with 4%, placing them between 18% and 26%, showing some signs of conservative growth. The NDP lags behind at 6%, but with 3%, they could be anywhere from 3% to 9%. The GPC sits at 3% with 2%, meaning their range is 1% to 5%. The Liberals have expanded their lead in Quebec, which is bad news for the Bloc, as they need to perform strongly to maintain their relevance. Ontario remains a high-stakes battleground, with the Liberals leading at 45%. Given their 6% margin, their support could range from 39% to 51%. The CPC is not far behind at 39% with a 6% margin, meaning their real support could be 33% to 45%. The NDP, traditionally stronger in urban centers like Toronto, holds 9%, but with 3%, this places them between 6% and 12%. The GPC sits at 4% with 2%, meaning they could be between 2% and 6%. Ontario is critical for both the Liberals and Conservatives, and this close race suggests that suburban ridings around the Greater Toronto Area, GTA, will be decisive. Prairies, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Here, the CPC dominates with 49%. With a 6% margin, their actual support could be 43% to 55%. The LPC follows at 33%, but with a 5% margin, they could be between 28% and 38%. The NDP holds 12% with 3%, meaning their real support falls between 9% and 15%. The GPC is at 3%, with 2% placing them between 1% and 5%. The Prairies remain a conservative stronghold, but the Liberals are holding their ground better than expected. In Alberta, the CPC remains dominant at 55%, but with a 6% margin, their actual range is 49% to 61%. The LPC holds 28%, with a 5% margin, meaning their real support could be 23% to 33%. The NDP is at 11%, with a 3% margin, placing them between 8% and 14%. Despite Conservative dominance, the Liberals are outperforming expectations, particularly in Calgary and Edmonton. British Columbia is shaping up to be a fierce battleground, with both the LPC and CPC tied at 40%. With a 6% margin, each party's real support could be 34% to 46%. The NDP, which has traditionally performed well here, holds 14% with 4%, meaning their actual support could be 10% to 18%. The GPC is at 5% with a 3% margin, placing them between 2% and 8%. British Columbia remains highly competitive, and the outcome will likely depend on urban and suburban ridings. Territories. The LPC leads in the territories with 45%, but with a 9% margin, their support could be anywhere from 36% to 54%. The CPC is second at 28%, with 8% placing them between 20% and 36%. The NDP holds 19% with 7%, meaning their actual support could be 12% to 26%. The GPC sits at 6% with 4%, meaning they could be between 2% and 10%. With the election just around the corner, the race remains highly competitive. The Liberals hold a national lead, but the Conservatives are making gains in key regions. Meanwhile, the NDP, Bloc Québécois, and Greens continue to fight for influence in their respective strongholds. With margins of error in play, these numbers could still shift significantly before Election Day. What do you think of these projections? Which party has the momentum? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more election updates. See you next time.